My future Mill tried to turn our simple wedding into her luxury event, so I called everything off. I'm 28, and until recently I was engaged to Maggie, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. Our story began like many others, a casual introduction at a friend's barbecue that turned into something special. Her warm laugh and genuine kindness drew me in immediately, and over the next year our relationship flourished naturally. Growing up in a middle-class family, I'd learned the value of financial responsibility early. My parents weren't wealthy, but they were wise with money, teaching me that happiness doesn't come from extravagant spending. I'd carried those lessons into adulthood, building a modest but stable life for myself. By the time I met Maggie, I had a good job in marketing, a decent savings account, and was proud of my financial independence. When I proposed, we both wanted the same thing, a modest, meaningful wedding that wouldn't start our marriage under a mountain of debt. Our initial budget was about $22,000, enough for a lovely celebration without breaking the bank. We planned everything carefully, making spreadsheets and researching vendors together. Maggie even found creative ways to cut costs without sacrificing beauty, like ordering flowers directly from a local greenhouse and having her talented aunt design our invitations. These planning sessions were some of my favorite memories, sitting on our couch with takeout, dreaming about our future together. Then there was Nancy, Maggie's mother. I should have seen the warning signs during our first meeting, when she spent 20 minutes interrogating me about my career prospects and family background. At the time, I chalked it up to maternal concern, but now I recognize it as the first hint of her obsession with status and appearances. During holiday gatherings, Nancy would make subtle digs about my choice of car or my preference for casual clothing over designer brands. "Oh, is that from last season?" she'd ask with a raised eyebrow, or "I suppose not everyone prioritizes presentation." I'd brush these comments off, focusing instead on how happy Maggie and I were together. As soon as wedding planning began, Nancy transformed from occasionally overbearing to completely domineering. She'd show up unannounced at our apartment with stacks of wedding magazines, pointing out venues that would have consumed our entire budget in one go. Her fixation on appearances extended to every aspect of the wedding. The chairs we'd selected weren't elegant enough. The menu was too simple. Even our choice of photographer was questioned because he hadn't shot any society weddings. Each criticism came with a more expensive alternative and an implication that we were somehow failing by not choosing it. I remember one particular afternoon when she cornered me in the kitchen during a family dinner. She'd brought up some celebrity wedding she'd read about, describing in excruciating detail how the mother of the bride had worn this stunning designer gown that made all the society pages. At the time, I just nodded politely, not realizing she was setting the stage for what was to come. The real drama exploded on a Saturday morning when Nancy appeared at my door unannounced. Maggie was there too, thankfully, or I might have thought I was hallucinating what happened next. Nancy waltzed in carrying a tablet, wearing what I later learned was a $500 casual outfit. "Just for running errands," she'd said. She pulled up photos of these elaborate designer dresses, each more extravagant than the last. "This is what mothers of the bride wear in proper weddings," she announced, scrolling through gowns that looked more suitable for a royal wedding than our park ceremony. She'd clearly done her research, rattling off designer names and celebrity weddings where similar dresses had been worn. Her eyes lit up with a fervor I'd never seen before as she described the hand-beating, the imported silk, the couture craftsmanship. "This one," she said, tapping the screen with a perfectly manicured nail, "is what I've chosen." The price tag made my coffee go down the wrong way, $10,000. That wasn't a typo. $10,000 for a dress she'd wear once, an amount that could have covered our entire catering budget or made a significant down payment on a house. When I managed to stop coughing, Nancy was already talking about payment arrangements, not asking if we'd contribute, but telling us how we should handle the installments. "As the groom," she said, fixing me with a stern look, "it's your responsibility to ensure the mother of the bride is properly attired. It's tradition." She'd even prepared a folder with financing options and payment plans as if she'd anticipated my hesitation. I'd never heard of such a tradition, and I said as much. That's when Nancy's pleasant facade cracked. "Well, if you truly loved my daughter, you'd want her family to look their best. Unless," she added with a sniff, "you're not as financially stable as you've led us to believe." The implication was clear in her mind. My unwillingness to pay for her dress somehow reflected on my worth as a future son-in-law. That was just the beginning of what I now think of as the dress campaign. Nancy launched a multi-pronged attack that would have impressed military strategists. First came the guilt trips, with daily phone calls about how she'd sacrificed everything for Maggie and how this dress was her one chance to shine at her only daughter's wedding. Then she enlisted relatives I'd never even met to call and email me about respecting traditions and honoring family. Some of these people lived across the country, but somehow had very strong opinions about what the mother of the bride should wear to a wedding they probably wouldn't even attend. I started dreading my phone's ringtone. Nancy's tactics escalated to showing up at my workplace during lunch breaks. She'd be waiting in the lobby, designer dress catalog in hand, ready to discuss options. My coworkers started giving me sympathetic looks, and I heard whispers about that poor guy with the crazy mother-in-law. One colleague even started texting me warnings when she spotted Nancy in the parking lot. The situation reached new levels of absurdity when Nancy started showing up at local bridal shops while Maggie was trying on wedding dresses. Instead of focusing on her daughter's special moment, she'd commandeer the appointment to try on expensive mother-of-the-bride gowns, then pointedly remark about how the perfect dress was just out of reach because of my limitations. One particularly memorable incident occurred during a family dinner at her house. Nancy had invited both our families, seemingly for a nice evening together. Instead, she'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, an actual PowerPoint breaking down why her designer dress was a necessary investment in our family's social standing. She'd included photos of other mothers of the bride in designer gowns, statistics about wedding guest expectations, and even a pie chart showing how $10,000 was reasonable compared to total wedding costs in our area. The presentation included testimonials from other mothers who'd worn designer dresses to their daughters' weddings, complete with social media engagement statistics. She'd even created a mock-up of how the local society pages might cover our wedding, with special emphasis on her stunning designer ensemble. My parents sat there in stunned silence while Nancy clicked through slides about maintaining appearances and social obligations. My father, usually the most diplomatic person I know, actually snorted when Nancy suggested we could just cut back on unnecessary expenses, like our honeymoon, to afford her dress. Nancy's manipulation extended to our other wedding vendors, too. She'd contact them behind our backs, trying to upgrade services and add extras, always indicating that I would cover the costs. Our modest wedding was slowly being transformed into an extravagant affair that we neither wanted nor could afford. The situation came to a head during that final cafe meeting. Nancy had arrived armed with printouts of email exchanges she'd had with the designer's boutique, including a payment plan she'd already arranged in my name. She'd somehow gotten hold of my social security number and had actually tried to open a credit card account to finance the dress. When I firmly refused and mentioned potential identity theft, she turned to Maggie and said, "If you marry him, don't expect to be welcomed in this family. He clearly doesn't understand our standards." What broke my heart wasn't just Nancy's behavior, but watching Maggie struggle with it all. Though she stood by me, each confrontation left her more drained. She developed anxiety attacks, constantly checking her phone in fear of another angry message from her mother. Our wedding planning sessions, which should have been joyful, became strategy meetings for handling the next crisis. But perhaps Nancy's most underhanded move came when she realized her dress demands weren't going to be met. One morning, I received a frantic call from the owner of our reception venue. He seemed confused and concerned, explaining that Nancy had called them claiming to be Maggie's wedding coordinator. According to him, she told them we were having serious financial difficulties, and the wedding would likely need to be canceled. Not only that, but she'd tried to modify our existing contract, attempting to add another 50 guests to our headcount, guests we'd never approved and certainly couldn't afford. She'd even gone so far as to try upgrading our basic wine selection to top-shelf champagne, assuring the venue that the groom would handle the additional charges. Thankfully, he had the sense to verify these changes with us first. When I explained the situation, he was appalled. He'd been in the wedding business for 30 years and had seen his share of difficult in-laws, but this was a new level of interference. He immediately flagged our account to prevent any unauthorized changes and required all modifications to have both my and Maggie's written approval. When confronted about this, Nancy played innocent, claiming she was just trying to help with the planning and make the wedding worthy of her daughter. But we could see it for what it was, another attempt to force our hand by creating chaos and additional expenses. If we couldn't afford her dress, she'd make sure we couldn't afford anything else either. After we canceled the wedding, Nancy's campaign shifted from getting her dress to destroying my reputation. She posted vague, but pointed comments on social media about gold diggers who present themselves as gentlemen and mothers protecting their daughters from financial predators. Some distant relatives still send me angry messages, convinced by Nancy's version of events that I left Maggie at the altar over money. The aftermath has been both painful and enlightening. Maggie and I tried to maintain contact at first, but the strain was too much. She's in therapy now, working through years of her mother's manipulation. I heard through mutual friends that Nancy still brings up the dress at family gatherings, painting herself as the victim of a cruel almost son-in-law who ruined everything. She's even started a blog about wedding culture and mother's rights, using our story as her founding post. The weeks following the cancellation were a blur of returned gifts, canceled vendors, and awkward explanations. Our friends were mostly understanding, especially those who'd witnessed Nancy's behavior firsthand. The elderly couple who owned the restaurant where we'd planned to have our reception even invited us both to dinner, separately, to make sure we were okay. I've had my moments of doubt, lying awake at night wondering if I could have handled things differently. But then I remember Nancy's PowerPoint presentation, the ambushes at my workplace, the attempted financial manipulation, and I know I made the right choice. A marriage needs a foundation of respect and understanding, not designer dresses and social climbing. Some of Maggie's relatives who initially sided with Nancy have reached out to apologize after seeing the full story. One cousin admitted that Nancy had pulled similar stunts at other family weddings, though never quite to this extent. It seems the $10,000 dress was just a symptom of a much deeper issue. Another relative confided that Nancy had driven away 3 of Maggie's serious boyfriends before me with similar controlling behavior. The experience has changed how I approach relationships and family dynamics. I'm more aware of red flags now, more cautious about establishing boundaries early on. I've learned that sometimes love isn't enough if it comes with strings attached and a designer price tag. Sometimes I think about Maggie and hope she's finding her own peace. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state for a fresh start, though Nancy apparently still sends her links to designer dress websites with notes about what could have been. As for Nancy, I heard she still has the dress catalog, showing it to anyone who will listen while telling her version of how a designer dress saved her daughter from a terrible marriage. In the end, what cost Nancy wasn't just a potential son-in-law, it was her relationship with her daughter, her reputation in the family, and any chance of being part of what could have been a happy union. All for a dress she never got to wear. Looking back, I realized that walking away wasn't just about the money. It was about recognizing that some prices are too high to pay, even when they're not measured in dollars. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a situation that's trying to change who you are. I might have lost a fiancé, but I kept my self-respect and financial security, and those are things no designer dress can replace.